Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of The Pig Edge, Teagasc Pig podcast with me, Amy Quinn, where we are bringing you the latest news, information and advice to keep Irish pig farmers up to date. For this episode, I am delighted to be joined by two guests, Teagasc Pig researcher Keelin O Driscoll and Head of Pig Knowledge Transfer, Ciarán Carroll. In this episode, we discuss WAFL 2021, a recent international welfare research conference that took place last month. Hosted by Teagasc and the University College Cork, we discussed the key points of interest that can be taken from this conference for Irish producers. I first asked Keelin to give us a little bit of background about the conference.
This conference is one that happens every 3 years. We had a 4-year gap this year because unfortunately last year we were scheduled to host it in UCC, but unfortunately COVID got in the way of it. So the official title of the conference is the International Conference on the Assessment of Animal Welfare at Farm and Group Level. And I guess from the title you can tell that although there's some work on animals like zoo animals included, most of it would be farm animals. And this year actually most of our presentations were on pigs, which was very appropriate because the organising committee consists of myself, Laura Boyle, yourself, Amy, and then Fidelma Butler from UCC. So we had 4 days of conference. It was a virtual event. We were delighted to have it opened by the president of UCC and the director of Teagasc and the head of the biological school. And then we were delighted as well that our own Minister for Agriculture gave the closing address. So we felt this kind of recognised the importance of the area, I suppose, in Ireland.
Ciarán, you were a conference delegate. What presentations really stood out for you from a pig farmer's point of view?
Yeah, I suppose it was an interesting conference overall, and there was a lot to be taken out of it. I suppose to pick a couple of papers, one was by Jacinta Boos from Wageningen University, and basically what she did a literature review looking at the whole area of feeding patterns and different factors then that might impact on that from a pig perspective. And I suppose most of us know most of the feeding or eating done by pigs is done during daylight hours. But this can change then depending on different stresses that may come on the system. So clinical disease, obviously anything like that that's going to stress a pig is going to decrease intake. But there was some interesting stuff around pigs that suffered chronic disease or, fever, things like that, had a much more depressed feed intake than, say, a pig that was lame. So a lame pig would go to eat more so than a pig that was struggling with fever. On the heat stress side, you might think maybe Ireland isn't an issue, or heat stress isn't an issue in Ireland, but I suppose if you think of the July, we had some very hot weeks there. And obviously heat stress, where pigs are stressed, they're going to decrease their intakes, but being the clever animals they're able to shift their patterns. So what was seen is that while weather was really hot and the housing temperatures might have been really hot, the pigs shifted their eating to nighttime. And I suppose a lesson there for us from an Irish perspective is, say you're on a wet feed system on your farm and feeding 4 to 6 times over the course of a day, with most of those feeds during the daylight hours, it might be worth considering increasing your frequency of feeds during the nighttime in periods of hot weather. So that would be a very relevant take-home message there. And then she also looked at the whole area of feed competition, and more competition for feeders. They looked at increasing the numbers of pigs in a pen or reducing the area or the number of feed spaces. Found that overall, over all the papers they looked at, that there was no real difference in terms of intake from a group perspective. So the overall group of pigs eating didn't lose intake. And the pigs, again, being clever as they are, they spread the duration. So while at an individual basis some pigs would have suffered on increased competition, most of them were able to spread their eating patterns over a longer period over the course of the day. So they ate more often, but maybe less of a duration. And while they were feeding, they increased the rate of eating as well to compensate. Another interesting paper, and it took me back actually to a time. I remember John Dunn, an Irish colleague who's working in an international company now at the moment, but he would have done a lot of work on sow reproduction. But just to give you the background on this paper, was Megan Hayes from Australia, where she looked at the effect of positive interactions on pigs. So that's proper handling, proper care, and they looked at it at 3 days of age and at 3 weeks of age, where they were doing different procedures, so ironing, teething and tailing, vaccinations maybe at 3 weeks and things like that. And basically the take-home message was the more positive a handler was with the pigs by providing good positive handling on a daily basis, not just at the procedure time, but going in, looking at the pigs, being I suppose friendly to the pigs and working with the pigs and providing a positive influence on them, that it increased the stress resilience of the pigs, so they were more able to cope with the different procedures that were being carried out. And I go back then to John Dunn, they found a similar, it was also with Paul Hemsworth and Hughes in Australia as well, coincidentally, where they found the same thing, that where sows were being managed properly and handled in a more friendly manner, that the reproductive performance was much better. So they would have been two of the take-home papers for me over the course of the few days.
Keelan, was there any standout presentations for you?
Well, for me, actually, one of the most interesting was actually the one that won our student presentation competition. And this was given by a student called Alice Scallery, who's also from Bragan University. And her presentation, for me, it was really interesting because it was on the subject of light for pigs, which is often really, really overlooked when we think of animal welfare. Most welfare work would look mostly at kind of the infrastructure on the farm or management, as Ciarán was talking about there, even though we know that light is important for pigs. So what Alice presented to us was basically a literature review overlooking the whole area of light. And she broke it down into 3 different kind of main areas, one being the photo period, which is the duration of light during the day. Then she considered the intensity or the brightness of the light, and then finally the spectrum of the light, so the color that the pigs can see. And what she found when she looked at the literature was that the majority of work has been done on health, reproductive, biological functioning of the animal, a little bit on natural behaviour, but not very much at all in general on welfare. And the few studies that she did find that looked at welfare did show actually that there can be significant effects. So the conclusion of her work really was that this is a whole area that needs to be looked into further. It could provide kind of options for producers, I suppose, that are relatively easy to take on board. If you're considering changing things like the photo period or the intensity of your light, it might be easier to do than changing, say, the design of your pens or anything. So for me, I thought that was really interesting and has potential to be very relevant to producers as well.
Yeah, it was a really interesting presentation. Ciarán, there was a number of Teagasc staff and students presenting at the conference. What were some of the key findings from these presentations?
Yeah, there was quite a few, a very impressive range, especially there was a lot of students presented and we had a number of the staff, including Keelin. I suppose just to pick out a few there, Orla Canan, technician with us at the moment, did a master's with Keelin there and looked at the whole area of free lactation, compared to the conventional crate. And we can see, look, the move is moving towards free lactation, free farrowing systems down the line. You can see it when you go to trade shows. There's a lot more of those systems on display, and there's a lot of lobbying going on, and there's the end of cage coming from Brussels as well. So it's an area we do need to be looking at and researching, and thankfully, Orla and Keelin have done some great work on that area. I suppose just to summarize some of the findings, they found that, if pigs were reared in free lactation, now we're talking free lactation as opposed to free farrowing. So free lactation is where the sow is created for up to 3 days after she farrows, and then she becomes loose. So she's basically lactating for nearly 4 weeks in a loose situation. Found a better locomotion score on those pigs. That would, I suppose, make sense because they're up and they're able to exercise more so than in the conventional system. There were more deaths from crushing, but overall the piglet mortality was similar between the conventional and the loose system, which is a good thing to hear. And the weaning weights of the pigs that were reared on the loose lactation system were heavier as well. So that's positive for growth as well, and that followed through to the finishers. And as Orla herself highlighted, like we're on a journey, I suppose, where eventually we will see free farrowing systems, but the free lactation certainly offers an intermediate solution in the interim for helping farmers to get used to a free system. So certainly, and she also referenced, the work, there is more work to be done, especially with larger litters, that we're seeing much larger litters nowadays. So there is a good bit more research to be done, and this is a good start from Teagasc. There was other students presented. Martina Lagoda, she presented on a locomotion scoring tool that she's been developing that would look at the gait of the animals and how to score lame animals and things like that, which was quite interesting. Jordi Camp Montoro, PhD student there, he was looking at the whole area of group size and how that might affect performance. So a range of group sizes from 10 up to 14 pigs in the Moore Park unit. Basically the findings from that was that there was no real effect on the group size. So the group size didn't impact, so the larger group didn't have a poorer performance than the smaller group size, but there was a bit more competition at the feeder. But I suppose referencing Jacinta Bus's work earlier, that maybe pigs are able to compensate a bit more for this by spreading their eating patterns over the course of the day and eating quicker when they are eating and things like that. So that was quite interesting. And then I suppose it would be remiss of me not to mention Keelin's presentation, where she talked about some work that Ninka Van Stavern, a former PhD student of Laura Boyle's, did at Moore Park, and it was looking at the whole area of serious tail lesions. And I suppose this started when people started to get interested in tail biting and issues that was causing on farms, and what were the economic costs of that. And so through some really good work there at Moore Park, they found that where there was approximately 1% serious tail lesions, was actually slightly less, 0.86%. It showed that there was a 5% decrease in average daily gain, which resulted basically in an increase of 7 days to slaughter, which as a farmer, there's a serious take-home message in that, that you need to be looking at these lesions and treating them as needed and trying to avoid them in the first place. When they put the economics on this and ran it through the Moore Park model, they found that the impact on net profit of having this 0.86% serious tail lesion resulted in a 15% decrease in net profit. So that just summarizes some of the multiple Teagasc presentations that were all quite good during the 4 days.
Keelin, there was also some past students from the Pig Department presenting also. What can we take from their work? So
yeah, we were delighted to welcome back some of our students that they've left us now, but it's nice to see them again. Jen Yun Chow, who did a lot of work on enrichment here in Moore Park a few years ago, she's now working over as a researcher in the University of Pennsylvania. So as Ciarán mentioned there's kind of moves towards providing animals with more freedom. It's the same in the US. And Jen, there's Proposition 12, which was recently passed in California, which prohibits, it's similar to the idea is similar to the end of the page age here, to promote zero confinement. This actually affects about 15% of the pig production in the US. So Jen's work over in Pennsylvania, she's focusing on sows kind of post-service and in the first 4 weeks of gestation, as opposed to sows in farrowing crates or during the full gestation, because there's been a very little work on this time, I suppose, due to the management needs of serving the sows, and also the fact that they're quite vulnerable at this stage. They've lost a lot of weight and they could be vulnerable to mixing with new animals. So Jen, again, this was another review paper. She looked into the literature and she actually only found 3 papers that specifically focused on this area. So again, I think she identified an important gap which might need a bit more work if there are going to be kind of pushes towards reducing the time that animals spend in crates. So another one of our ex-students that came back to present at the conference was Phoebe Hartnett. Phoebe's actually still working in Teagasc, which is in the dairy department now. And she presented some of the work that she carried out during her PhD in the pig department. So you'll probably recall Phoebe did work on methods of rearing gilts to try and optimize their health and welfare. And she had 2 main treatments. One of them was keeping the gilts in female-only groups from weaning onwards, as opposed to mixing them with males. And the other treatment she had was providing them with some supplementary copper, zinc, and manganese to see if this could improve their limb health. And what she presented at the conference was the results of dissections she carried out on some of the front limbs to see whether these treatments did actually improve the health of the cartilage. The gilts were at breeding age when the limbs were removed from them, which is quite a young stage of their lives. But nevertheless, she found that all of them actually had some damage to their cartilage. But the good thing, I suppose, is that she found that the ones that were reared in female-only groups had significantly fewer lesions to the cartilage. So this shows the benefits of separating them early on in their life. And she also found that these gilts had increased bone mineral density, the female-only gilts, particularly if they were supplemented with the additional minerals. So there were some benefits there as well.
It was really great to see some of the excellent work from Teagasc staff and students, past and present, over the few days. And I suppose the striking thing about these projects is how practical they all were. Ciarán, as well as the 88 oral presentations at the conference, there was a further 115 poster presentations. Was there anything we could learn from these?
There was a lot to get through, to be fair, with the number, the 118 post presentations. There was a hell of a lot over 4 days. But yeah, I've just picked out two. I suppose one, I've never really given it any thought, but if you look at the whole area of farrowing and piglets being born with low energy reserves, and I suppose we all know that the most crucial thing for them when they're born is to get a good suck of colostrum at the start. And the other key factor then is heat, and to make sure that they're warmed up and get warmed up to normal temperatures as quickly as possible. And for this we have heat pads and we have infrared lamps and things like that. But I never gave it actually much thought to see how long does it take a pig to get from being born onto the heat pad itself or into the creep area. So Stanbuck et al, they had some interesting work where they timed the amount of time it took from a pig litter being farrowed for 50% of them to get onto the heat pad. And it took a minimum of 6 hours, but up to 20 hours before there was 50%. So say a litter of 14, that it took nearly up to 20 hours in some cases for at least 7 of those pigs to get onto the heat pad, making sure that they were getting warmed up properly. And I suppose it was just interesting because it never occurred to me how long it would take something like that, but it does highlight the need for assistance and need for management around farrowing times to make sure that we're getting our pigs the necessary treatment and giving them the best start that we can give them. Another interesting one, I suppose, interesting from a farmer perspective, it was Spanish work done by Vidal Cardos, and he was looking at the whole area. It was a review of what farmers were doing and what strategies they were implementing to try and decrease tail biting on farms. And from his review of all the work that was being done, the two key take homes were looking at the whole area of stocking density or stocking rates. And farmers saw that as one of the key areas to focus on if you're trying to reduce tail biting incidents on farms, to make sure that your stocking rates are correct and not overstocked. And the other area was the whole area of enrichment, that farmers ranked that quite high, that the provision of environmental enrichment was important. And they did find that where multiple sources of enrichment, as in not huge numbers, but 3, we say, so we're looking at the likes of chains combined with wood and rope, or chains with wood and peat briquettes, things like that were working well for them on farms. So it was a combination of a few different sources of enrichment, and they were the two main ones that the farmers were taking as their first steps if they were trying to address tail biting issues on their farms.
Keelin, was there any standout posters for you?
Well, I suppose I'm going to come back again to Teagasc. We had some very nice posters from our own team here again. One of them was from Shilpi Misra, and Shilpi actually, her work focuses more on the environment. She's looking at how to optimize water use on pig farms, because water is a very valuable environmental resource. So Shilpi has she's actually met quite a lot of you, I'd say, because she's gone out working on a few commercial farms, but she did some targeted work here in Moorpark to see if she could find some ways to reduce the amount of water that finisher pigs waste, because they actually use most of the drinking water on the farms. And they waste a lot of it as well, because if they're playing with drinkers, then that water just goes straight down through the slats. So Shilpi looked at the effect of group size, and she also looked at the effect of providing them with some extra enrichment. The idea being that if you give them a rack, in our case, we filled it with fresh grass, but you could fill it with anything you want really. Would that distract them away from the drinkers and then reduce the amount of water that was being wasted? And she actually found that this was the case. Not only was the behaviour spectrum better in the groups with more enrichment, so they'd less aggressive behaviour, they'd more enrichment directed behaviour, and they'd less damaging behaviour, but also they wasted significantly less water. So this shows I suppose the benefits to the producer and to the environment as well, kind of a knock-on benefit to the benefit that the pigs get from providing enrichment. She didn't really find a huge amount of an effect when it came to the size of the pen, but she did find that, not with regard to wastewater, but she did find that there were fewer negative and damaging behaviours in the large groups as well. And this is good because our large groups would reflect more the size of typical groups on commercial farms. So that was quite a nice poster. And then the other poster that I'd like to highlight is by Roberta Delicio. She's a PhD student working on risk factors for tail biting. And she presented the work from her first project, which was looking at ways to try and refine the way we score pigs' tails in the factory. We do a lot of work here in Moore Park looking at tails in the factory, but also it's something that more and more is being rolled out, I suppose, across the EU as a method of trying to reflect what's happening on farm. But as you can imagine, the setup of each factory is different. If there's a lot of this scoring going on, it's not going to be possible to examine each tail in detail. So what Roberta did was she compared a detailed examination using, when you can hold the tail and look at it closely, to just visual scoring. And she also separated out scoring the actual teeth marks and bites of the tail from bruising on the tail, because we thought perhaps bruising may not be caused by tail biting, it could be caused by pigs bumping into each other or the equipment. So what she found, which was great, is that visually scoring the tails, so without needing to touch the tails or manipulate them, was actually almost as accurate as scoring them in that more detailed fashion. So this opens up the possibilities of just putting a camera in the factory or something, rather than having to have a person there all the time. She found that this was particularly accurate for the bruising, more so than the bite marks, but it was pretty accurate overall. And she did find as well that the bruising the amount of bruising was related to the amount of biting, so our tooth marks. So it does seem that the bruising is related in some way to biting behaviour, as opposed to just from damage caused by infrastructure. So that was they were quite interesting posters, I think, and show again the relevance of the work that we do, I suppose, in Teagasc to the industry in general.
Keelin, you were also involved in arranging a workshop at the conference on the efforts we've made here in Ireland on raising pigs with intact tails. Could you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so this workshop, the idea for the workshop came about because tails are a topical issue, not only in Ireland, but across Europe at the moment. And Laura and I are involved in an EU project looking at a precision livestock tool to try and help us predict when tail biting outbreaks might occur, so that then we can go in and prevent them from happening before they become serious. So as part of this project, one of the things we're trying to do is interact with stakeholders in the pig industry and other researchers, so that we can get feedback from other people who are directly working with the pigs and help guide us. So the facilitator of the workshop was actually Mona Larson, who's our partner in Belgium. And so she coordinated. Most of the presentations at the workshop were from Ireland, because we wanted to give an Irish perspective, because the conference was being held here. So we started off with some presentations from the Department of Agriculture. We got an overview, first of all, of some of the results from the Department of Agriculture on-farm welfare inspections at the moment. So this provided a bit of a snapshot of what they're finding practically on farm. And following this, then we had an update on the ante and post-mortem inspection protocols that DAFM are rolling out in factories in the country. The ante ones are already up and running, and the post-mortem ones hopefully soon. Roberta then gave a presentation as well on her findings from the factory tail inspection she's carried out over the past year. And finally then Carla Gomez in Animal Health Ireland provided information about what Animal Health Ireland are doing to kind of help move this whole area forward. They're carrying out work with training PVPs to carry out their assessments, and then gathering all of the data into a database. We also heard from somebody from the Danish Competent Authority to let us know what's happening over there. And then once we'd all that background data covered, the project team provided an overview of what we're planning to do in the project, the specific tool that we're going to be using to try and predict the biting outbreaks. And finally, then I suppose the most important part of it was we had some breakout groups where people were split into groups of about 5 or 6 people and discussed their own thoughts about what they'd heard, what they thought about the tool we were planning, some of the barriers that they thought could be to adoption of it. So it went really well. We have all of the presentations recorded, and what we'd really like to do next is roll it out to stakeholders in the Irish pig industry, because we'd really like to hear your opinions, provide you with some of the information about what's happening in Ireland, very up-to-date information, obviously, because it's from up-to-date as of August this year. And then, just really hear what you think about things and where you see things going and some of the opportunities or barriers that you can foresee. So this is being organised by the Pig Department at the moment. We're hoping it will be in the next few months, and it'll be advertised in the Teagasc newsletter.
Thanks for joining me, Keelin and Ciarán. Really interesting to hear what you both took from the conference. Some really interesting research points there for producers. It's also great to find out about the upcoming workshop for our producers as well. Thanks.
Thanks a million, Amy.
No bother, Amy. Thanks very much.
That's it for this episode of The Pig Edge. And many thanks to Keelin and Ciarán for joining me on the show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more farming information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Amy Quinn, thanks for listening, and don't forget to join me next month for another episode of The Pig Edge.